This is CBN NewsWatch.
And thank you so much for joining us. I'm Ephraim Graham. Ahead today, a Republican victory in the Senate election in Mississippi that had been marred by racial tensions, and a look at the possibility of war between Russia and Ukraine and why Orthodox churches are a factor in this conflict. Plus, other important stories, including how the recent murder of a missionary shows the dangers missionaries still face around the world, how a cross set up as a memorial for World War I veterans could be forced to come down, and how you can improve your health by taking charge of your genetic makeup. All those stories and so much more are ahead in this edition of CBN NewsWatch. We want to begin this hour, though, with the runoff election in Mississippi, where Republicans kept a Senate seat after incumbent Cindy Hyde-Smith easily won over her Democratic challenger, Mike Espy. Hyde-Smith won by a decisive margin of 8 points.
I am so grateful. I'm so humbled for the honor that you have given me to elect me as your United States Senator. It is hard to describe the feelings tonight for me and my family, but tonight in this victory, the reason we won is because Mississippians know me and they know my heart, and thank you for stepping up, Mississippi.
And it's very clear to me and to our campaign that there just are not enough votes outstanding to make the difference. So I wanted to come out here tonight and talk about what is still a historic achievement. A minute ago, I did call Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith, and I and I congratulated her on her victory tonight, and she has my prayers as she goes to Washington to unite a very divided Mississippi.
The race had been rocked by a video where Hyde-Smith had said of a supporter, "If he invited me to a public hanging, I'd be on the front row." That made Mississippi's history of racist lynchings an element of the election. But Hyde-Smith's supporters and some political analysts said the furor over her comments was overblown and that many things had been taken out of context. Hyde-Smith is the first woman elected to the Senate from Mississippi. I want to turn now overseas. Some fear a war between Russia and Ukraine could break out again after Russia seized 3 Ukrainian ships, and the flare-up could be the result of a turf battle between the Russian-Ukrainian Orthodox churches. Sunday near Crimea, Russian border guards rammed into and then opened fire on 3 Ukrainian Navy vessels, those ships traveling from the Black Sea toward a Ukrainian port. CBN's director for Russia and Ukraine, Steve Weber, believes that action could have been Putin's angry response to the Orthodox Church's decision to take parishes in Ukraine out from under the control of the Russian Patriarch in Moscow.
It could be connected to what happened just a few weeks ago when this Bartholomew in Istanbul, with a stroke of a pen, took 12,000, a third of all of the churches under the Moscow Patriarch, and gave them to the Ukrainian Patriarch. This created anger in Putin. It's like you lost power over all of these, a third of his parishes.
The United States and its allies condemned the Russian seizure of the ships at the United Nations. President Donald Trump is scheduled to meet with Putin next week, but some sources say the president may cancel that meeting over the seizure of the Ukrainian ships. CBN's Dale Hurd is following this story for us today. He joins us now. So why would the loss of Orthodox churches matter so much to Putin?
Good question. It's a little different over there. There's a heavy political and patriotic component to the Orthodox churches. But mostly Putin wanted the prestige of Russia essentially reigning over the worldwide Orthodox communion, including the Ukrainian churches. And it was a way to a degree, of controlling Ukrainian parishioners if their patriarch is in Moscow.
Mm-hmm. So why can Russia and Ukraine seem to not be able to settle their differences?
Good question. I think to be fair to Russia, they don't trust NATO. They don't want another NATO nation on their border because of what they saw in the Balkans with Syria. But Russia also has control issues. They want to control Ukraine. They don't want an independent Ukraine. Their roots go back to Ukraine and Kiev in ancient times. And so they want to continue a close relationship that they dominate.
All right. Well, we continue to watch this, Dale. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Here now is a quick look at some of the other stories we're following for you today inside the CBN newsroom. Winter, it's moving in hard over parts of the nation, from lake-effect snow from the Great Lakes to the east of Buffalo, New York, and parts of northwestern Pennsylvania. Up to a foot of snow is expected in some of these areas Wednesday alone, and Buffalo could get as much as 20 inches of snow from the same system. The Trump administration says it will appeal a judge's order that prevents it from enforcing a ban on asylum for any immigrants who enter the U.S. illegally. The Justice Department plans to appeal the order to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. President Trump criticized the Ninth Circuit Court last week as biased, and he called the judge who had ruled against him a quote, Obama judge. The Ninth Circuit Court is widely seen as very liberal and has already ruled against the president in several immigration cases. With the possibility of a government shutdown coming up in just over a week, President Trump met with Republican leaders Tuesday to work out a spending plan that includes funding for the president's proposed border wall with Mexico. President Trump wants $5 billion for the wall, and he's increasing the pressure on Congress to provide it. House Republicans approved the $5 billion for the wall in a key committee, but a bipartisan bill in the Senate only allowed $1.6 billion for it. House Majority Whip Steve Scalise asked if Democrats would be willing to shut down the government because they don't want to keep America safe. You can find more on these stories and others throughout the day, always at CBNNews.com. We turn now to an exclusive interview with America's ambassador to Israel. David Friedman tells CBN News why President Trump's decision to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem was so significant.
First and foremost, it was the day that I think the United States put itself on the right side of history. I would suggest maybe your audience might agree with me, put itself on the right side of God. It was the day that we recognized really one of the great historical truths of our time. The fact is that everybody recognized Jerusalem was the capital of Israel, but no one did anything about it. President Trump closed the deal. He sided with the truth, and I think that decision has now resonated throughout his foreign policy in all kinds of directions, and I think it was just an extraordinarily important decision for the United States.
And we'll have more of Chris Mitchell's interview with Ambassador Friedman on today's 700 Club. Also here tomorrow on NewsWatch and at CBNNews.com. He will look at the Trump administration's upcoming peace plan, the growing danger from Iran, and why evangelical support is so important to Israel. The recent death of a missionary on a remote island in India is highlighting the dangers of being a missionary, especially in certain parts of the world. I spoke with CBN's senior international correspondent Gary Lane, who shared how missionaries have faced dangers for generations and what it's like for them today. This story is certainly tragic, but also a reminder of how dangerous it can be for missionaries.
Extremely dangerous, especially if you have a zeal to share Christ with people who are hostile or potentially hostile. And that is what happened to John Chow. Now, he was a young man who just wanted the people of North Sentinel Island to know Christ. And for that, he paid with his life, Ephraim. He wasn't going to give up on that. He felt that, of course, he said that he didn't want to die, but he was willing to die because he felt it was important that God was calling him to do that.
And he knew the risk and dangers going in. Now, something like this happened before in the 1950s with a group of missionaries in South America?
Yes, and unlike John Chow, now Chow went into North Sentinel Island by boat in 1956. Nate Saint and Jim Elliott and three others went into eastern Ecuador, and this is from the movie End of the Spear. By the way, that movie came out, as you know, about 13 years ago. Wonderful story, but tragic as well. And they just felt a need. They flew into this area in eastern Ecuador, into the Auca tribe. At that time, they were called the Auca tribe, and brought Jesus to them. But with that, the tribal people turned on them and speared them to death, and they died. Now, we say this is a tragedy, but you know, God uses this to build his church. And guess what? The leader of that tribe, Ephraim, came to Christ after that incident. And so did other members. And of course, you get the tribal leader, then you get other members of the church, of the tribe that come to Christ.
So sacrifice their life to take the gospel. Tell us about another dangerous part of the world, the 1040 window and efforts to take the gospel there.
Well, the 1040 window is an area, if you look at a map, map, it begins in Western Africa, across Africa, northern Africa, actually the northern half of Africa, and moves into the Middle East, into places like Iran and Saudi Arabia. And then from there into Afghanistan, India, into Myanmar, China, and of course Japan. So that's the 1040 window, Ephraim. And those are people that are either Muslim, Buddhist, or Hindu, and mostly unreached people. People who've never heard the gospel. You'd be amazed. You go into places like the Hindu Kush Mountains, and there are people there who've never heard of Christ. They've never met a Christian in their life. It's very dangerous if you go into these areas, but also very fruitful, because many people in those areas, once they hear the gospel, will come to Christ. They're very receptive. People are afraid to go in, but once you go in, you find that the people are very warm and will come to Christ.
Can you share a little bit about just the heart of missionaries? I know you travel the world, you get to spend a lot of time with them. Just to share a little their heart and why they do what they do.
Well, and I've worked for a mission group, the Voice of the Martyrs, for about 3 years. I can tell you the heart of missionaries is to serve and to share the gospel. They're evangelists first and foremost, but they want to serve as well. It's not just bringing the gospel, but going and living with the people, sharing the love of Christ, materially, providing material goods, and also spiritually, Bibles and so forth. So it isn't just bringing the gospel, but also demonstrating the love of Christ and being with the people that you want to reach and serving them, building relationship.
That's beautiful. Real quick before we go, how should we be praying for missionaries?
Well, missionaries have it very, not all missionaries. Some live in pretty good countries where they don't have the same risks, but we have risks right here in the United States. I met some evangelists who were beaten up just for sharing the gospel here in the U.S. But pray that God will protect them, of course, but pray that He will give them wisdom when they go into those areas that are difficult and risky.
Amen. Gary Lane, thank you so much. Coming up, the legal challenge to a cross that was set up to honor veterans of World War I. We're going to have the story when we come back. And welcome back. A cross to honor World War I veterans is at risk of being removed after a legal challenge by an atheist organization. I spoke with Mike Berry of First Liberty about the battle over the memorial cross in Bladensburg, Maryland. Give us a status on the legal wranglings of the cross right now.
Well, the Supreme Court recently announced that it's going to hear this case in what's likely to be the first big blockbuster case of the year and of the term. And so this case pits, like you said, a World War I Veterans Memorial against the American Humanist Association, who is fighting to have this memorial torn down.
History about the memorial. This is a rare tribute to World War I veterans, correct?
That's right. It was put up almost 100 years ago. Partially funded by mothers of 49 men from Prince George's County, Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C., who lost their sons in World War I. And they put this memorial up to honor those who served and sacrificed in World War I. It stood there untouched for almost 100 years. And like I said, the American Humanist Association filed a lawsuit to have it torn down. First Liberty Institute, along with the American Legion, is fighting to preserve this and obviously many other veterans memorials across our country from these types of legal attacks.
That said, why is this a critical and important case to win?
Well, from the human perspective, it's important that we preserve the memories of those who've served and sacrificed for our freedoms, particularly those who served in World War I and really any conflict on behalf of the United States. And from a legal perspective, it's really important that the court take this case as it did to clear up the confusion around the First Amendment and whether the First Amendment requires us to tear down these veterans memorials or whether the First Amendment will continue to protect and honor those who've served and the ability for people like the American Legion and millions of Americans to honor service members who have served and sacrificed on our behalf.
People who are interested in getting involved, what would you say to them?
Well, the easiest way is to go to firstliberty.org, or you can go to don'ttearmedown.com, and there you can find out more about the history of these veterans memorials. You can find out about the 49 men who served and died in World War I, and you can learn about how you can support First Liberty in our effort to protect not only the Bladensburg Veterans Memorial, but veterans memorials that are all across the country that are coming under attack. So again, that's firstliberty.org.
Good. Give us a bit of a timeline in terms of how soon you expect things to begin unfolding more here.
Well, actually, we have just begun the briefing process. So we're going to be submitting our briefs to the Supreme Court, arguing the legality of this and the constitutionality of this memorial. And we expect that the court will probably have an oral argument in this sometime in the late winter, early spring of 2019. So people should definitely stay tuned for those blockbuster arguments sometime early in 2019.
All right, we'll be watching indeed. Mike Berry, thank you so much for your time. Coming up, you may have been born with some bad genetics, but did you know you can turn off your bad genes and turn on your good ones? We're going to have the story right after this. Welcome back. Some people look at their family tree and worry their ancestors may have passed on serious genetic problems like heart disease, diabetes, or even cancer. But we have some good news. Your genes actually don't have to control your life. Today, we take a closer look at the new science of epigenetics. It tells that through our behavior, we can turn our genes on and off. Here's CBN's health reporter, Lori Johnson.
If you wish your ancestors gave you better DNA, you're not alone. Epigenetics expert Dr. Sarah Gottfried says we could all use an upgrade in that department.
I've tested a lot of people over the past 12 years in terms of genomics, and everyone has 2 to 5 not so great genes.
Including herself.
I happen to have a problem with genes related to weight gain. So I have one gene in particular called the fatso gene, FTO, and it just makes me programmed to be about 200 pounds no matter what I do.
But as you can see, Dr. Gottfried silenced it.
So one of the ways of turning the switch off for the FTO gene is to eat a low-carb diet, kind of the right amount of carbs, mostly from vegetables. The other thing that I do is I exercise for a minimum of 30 to 60 minutes a day. So high-intensity interval training is really good for me in terms of silencing this gene and making sure that it's not raising my body mass index and making me fatter.
Some people are afraid to take these DNA tests because they don't want to know if they have a bad gene like the one for Alzheimer's. But many experts say it's better to know because there are ways to silence these genes. For instance, in his book, The End of Alzheimer's, researcher Dr. Dale Bredesen lists dozens of lifestyle changes that have proven effective in squelching the Alzheimer's gene for hundreds of patients.
If there are specific exposures, you want to get rid of those. If there are specific nutritional changes, you want to address those. If there are hormonal changes, you want to address those. If there are inflammatory changes, address those.
For example, eating a low-sugar diet, taking certain supplements like curcumin, and avoiding neurotoxic chemicals such as synthetic fragrances.
Alzheimer's disease is no longer a mystery. You don't have to say, we don't know why you get it, we don't know what to do about it. We do know why you get it, we do know what to do about it, and we know how to prevent it.
In his book, Change Your Genes, Change Your Life, Dr. Kenneth Pelletier says DNA is not our destiny.
At first, I thought, like everyone, that genetics determines who we are. Color of your hair, your height, the diseases you'll get, how long you'll live. And then as I got further into it, I realized that was not the case.
For example, twins with the same genes but different lifestyles often experience different health outcomes.
So there may be a 40% that one twin will have heart disease, but not the other. It's very low with cancer, maybe 30%. So all of these very strong genetic pushes for major diseases were not showing up in the twin studies. And they said, what's going on here? And that was the beginning of kind of epigenetics.
So when it comes to our genes, our behavior can carry consequences for ourselves and our ancestors. Lori Johnson, CBN News.
And still to come, a potential scientific explanation that agrees with the description in the Bible for the destruction of the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. We're going to have that story when we come back. Could a meteor have destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah? Archaeologists believe they found evidence of an explosion from a low-altitude meteor strike 3,700 years ago in the area of Jordan. It may have been responsible for destroying cities, villages, and farmland. The director of scientific analysis at the excavation project in Jordan told Science News the explosion instantly killed 40 to 65,000 people, and the temperature from the explosion could have been as hot as the surface of the sun. It took 600 years for the soil to recover before civilization could return to the area. A Biblical Archaeology Review article in 2013 suggested the area is a strong candidate for the location of the ancient city of Sodom. You can find out more about how this explosion fits the biblical description of Sodom's destruction at cbnnews.com. Right now, it is time for your Wednesday Word, and here's a thought I pray will encourage you today. If you look to rise high to reach God's promises and purpose for your life, you must first go low on your knees in prayer. It's going to take constant prayer to the God who designed you and His plan for your life to be consistently guided on His flight plan. With that word, I encourage you to make this a wonderful Wednesday. That will do it for this half hour of CBN NewsWatch. Remember, you can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about at cbnnews.com. We'd love to know what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can do that by emailing us. The address is newswatch@cbn.com. And of course, you can always reach out and touch us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. See you tomorrow, everybody.